our students can have lots of competing priorities when they come into the classroom. Sometimes our students have to make a choice between working and coming to class, maybe even buying groceries for their family and choosing to buy books. And this is what we know. When our students come into our classroom, into our learning experiences, they're bringing their whole self. So, this is a question we have to consider. What resources are available to help our students achieve success? For me, I knew I wanted to be a nurse since I was a very young child, and it really was related to the care that my mom received when she was in a hospital. Now, back in those days, you could actually take your child to the hospital. And for my mom, as a single parent, that was important to her because she knew how sad I was going to be when she wasn't there. We have to realize that for our students, protecting that student faculty relationship and really demonstrating caring behaviors, just like Gene Watson talks about when it comes to the patient and the nurse interaction, we can consider some of those same caring practices in the behaviors that we choose to demonstrate with our students. Table 14.1, that's in Billings and Halstead 6th edition, is going to describe not only the tenets, the underpinnings of 5 categories of the main learning theories that you want to focus on, it also describes some specific examples of behaviors that we should demonstrate that will directly align with that specific learning theory. Welcome back, everybody, to Dr. Sellars Educate, where our mission is to support all nurse educator colleagues on the journey to achieve excellence. Now, for some of you, you're showing up because you just want to hear about the topic of the week, and that's great. We're glad that you're here. For other colleagues, maybe on the journey to achieve certification as a nurse educator, or maybe you're a nurse showing up just to get a better understanding of what this whole CNE is all about. Whatever the reason you're showing up, we're happy that you're here. And as you can see, we like to jump right into our content. We're continuing our journey of what you should focus on and what you should not focus on in preparation for the CNE. However, this conversation is really more than just about the CNE. It really is thinking about our why. I want you to go ahead right now, if you haven't already, print out the study worksheet that's right here in the description. And I want you to write down your why. Now that I've shared my why, and I know this is often an activity that we do with our students, and it's a great activity to do because oftentimes whenever the nursing program gets tough, we want our students to go back, take a look at your why, make sure you're still aligning your priorities with your why as a nursing student to make sure that you stay focused and you're able to accomplish your goal. Well, it's the same with the CNE exam. So think about, why is it that you want to achieve your certification? If it's a personal goal or professional goal, it meant something to you to go on this journey. You're spending a lot of time, you're investing your financial resources to help you achieve success, okay? And we don't want you wasting any of that. Not your time, not your financial resources. Time is our most valuable asset. Once it's gone, we can't get it back. Okay, so what we want to do first is let's take a look at our Rooted in Wisdom book. Some of you already know that this is a devotional specifically to support our nurse educator colleagues who every now and again we need some inspiration, we need some encouragement, even ourselves, to fill our cup. We can't pour from an empty cup. And one of the strategies we want all colleagues out there to use is to think about reflecting. Think about reflective practice and the importance that we talk about to our students. This really important step is, as a nurse, well, we want to do it too, okay? We want to take time to reflect. Today, our devotional is day 24, The Power of Influence. Ralph Nader said in a quote, "The function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers." All right, so I'm going to read that again. Ralph Nader's quote is that the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. Now, we all know the importance of effective followership, right? Because the reality is, if we don't have followers, who are we leading, right? A great colleague, a mentor of mine, actually said that many, many years ago to me when it was a tough time in my leadership journey, and I was bringing a team on this journey to establish culture of excellence on a nursing department. That specific department had the lowest patient satisfaction scores throughout the hospital, and they had a lot of adverse events. one of my goals was to make sure that we changed that very quickly. Well, I learned through training, through coaching, that you have to make sure that somebody is following you, or else you're just taking a walk, right? So we want to make sure that we are role modeling these behaviors that really do emphasize the importance of true leadership, which means that we're creating inclusive experiences with our students to support that healthy student-faculty relationship, right? We are the leader in our classroom, and so we want to be collaborative. We want to demonstrate these evidence-based practices in a way that inspires our students and encourages them to engage in inclusive practices. All right, so this is what I want you to think about for this entire week. So our devotional says, great nurse educators don't just teach, they inspire. Your influence extends far beyond the classroom, shaping the confidence and career paths of your students. Your ability to model professionalism and excellence will leave a lasting legacy. Today's action, you are going to encourage a student who shows leadership potential. Share with them what you see. Talk to them about the value of demonstrating those leadership behaviors that will take them far in nursing. And then the other point I want to make is about reflective practice. When you think about the strategies you're using today to demonstrate those caring behaviors, what is just one strategy you can use, one step you can take to help increase your influence that you have with your students? Maybe it's taking more time to engage in that 1-minute reflection that I love, or maybe it's you thinking about how can you more candidly have open-ended conversations with your students about how they feel. Okay, we know that effective learning domain talks about the value of connecting with emotions, and most importantly, also being able to listen, actively listen, and to make decisions based on the communication and the information that you're receiving regarding those emotions. Okay, so that's what I want you to think about. Just identify one strategy that you can use to improve the student-faculty relationship that you are seeing with your students. Now, for purposes of our discussion today, you're going to focus on flipped classroom. All right, so we are continuing our conversation about what you should study, what you should not study. And so in Billings and Halstead, you all know we're using the 6th edition. Okay, if you have the 7th edition, that's great, but the pages we're referring to is in the 6th edition. This is going to be on page 292. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about flipped classroom, what it is and what it is not, because this is absolutely a strategy that you want to focus on as you're exploring concepts to help you close, hopefully, your knowledge gaps and be able to truly align theory with practice. Okay, that's our goal. When you look at the blueprint for CNE, CNE PV, CNE Novice, as well as the actual CNE clinical exam, each of them have their own blueprint. In our previous snapshot, we went on a journey together to the NLN.org website, looked at the eligibility criteria, and really talked about what strategies you should use to determine which exam is going to best align with your everyday work and which exam you should take. All right, and as always, if you have any questions, NLN is going to be your primary source. So emailing them certification@nln.org is going to be your best step. So now let's talk a little bit about the concept that we are going to explore related to what you're going to focus on and what you're not going to focus on when it comes to the CNE exam. First, we're going to take a look at this thought-provoking question, see what you all think. And when we're talking about the thought-provoking questions, remember that the goal is that you have this deep understanding that is necessary. So when you get to the exam, it's really not about trying to memorize information, okay? You want to be able to process information in a way during your journey, your study journey, hopefully your 7-week study plan that you have in front of you. You're going to be able to really walk through each of these thought-provoking questions and identify, number one, what is this question really asking me? And second of all, what is it that I know for sure about concepts included in this question? Okay, so those are really 2 important thoughts that you want to have for every single CNE question. And then the other point we want to make is, as we're talking through the rationale, we want you to have clarity about not only why the right answer or the answer you chose is correct, but also why are those other 2 options not correct? Now, that's Where the peanut butter really sticks to the bread, okay, is when you figure out, you have this light bulb moment where you have that deep understanding as to why those other two options are definitely not correct, okay? So let's talk through this one and see what you think. A nurse educator notices students can recall information from lectures, but they struggle to apply concepts during clinical experiences. Which strategy best aligns with Kolb's experiential learning theory? All right, so we have three choices. So our first choice is increase the number of lecture hours covering concepts. And let me go to large screen so you all can see. There we go. So increase, again, A is increase the number of lecture hours covering clinical concepts. All right, so that's A. B is incorporate simulation, followed by guided reflection and discussion. C is assign additional textbook readings and assignments before clinical. All right, so I'll give you all a minute to really think through, again, the rationale for the correct and incorrect answer. And then we'll come back together before we end our time together and take a look at the correct answer and talk through the rationale. Okay, so that's what I want you to think about right now. What's your answer and that rationale for the incorrect and the correct answer? When you get to the CNE exam, there are 150 questions, and you will have a total of 3 hours to take the exam. Okay, you want to pace yourself, all right, which is one of the tips we're going to talk about during our time together today. All right, so now what you want to be able to do is to identify what your next steps are going to be. All right, so even if you have no idea what the correct answer is, that's okay, because we're going to go over it together. So you all have had a chance to write down the correct answer and your rationale for the incorrect answer. Now we're going to recap the 2 strategies that we talked about that is going to help you achieve that passing score on the CNE exam. And we're also going to talk about some of the key elements when we discuss those evidence-based teaching strategies. We're going to talk about specifically the flipped classroom and what is it that you need to know, again, using Billings and Halstead to go a little bit deeper. All right, so first of all, we're talking about the top 10 CNE exam strategies as well as Kolb experiential learning theory, right? You already heard that as part of our opening question to have a deeper understanding of what those concepts are that we are discussing with our students. Okay, so first of all, tip number 1 was for you to do that self-assessment, right? We talked about that in a previous snapshot. Doing that self-assessment, having an honest conversation with yourself about where your knowledge gaps are as it relates to that exam blueprint. Now, regardless of what exam you're taking, we all know, even for NCLEX, right, there's a test plan, there's a blueprint. Our ability to be honest with ourselves about where our knowledge gaps are is a key step on this journey to helping us identify and really walk out what our plan for success is going to look like. All right, so who can remember tip number 2? All right, and if you don't remember, just go back to the previous snapshot. All right, tip number 2 is Bloom's taxonomy. We want to know the verbs. We want to make sure that there's alignment when we're writing down our course objectives and our program objectives. And we also want to align our assignments. So when we're thinking about the actual learning strategies that we're using, we want to make sure that we're scaffolding, okay? Just like pages 188 through 190 in Billings and Halstead talk about. So we want to make sure we're scaffolding, building on prior learning when we're developing those assignments, when we're mapping out the specific learning objectives that we expect our students not only to complete in that class, but also we want to look at how it's carried throughout our curriculum, throughout our program of study. So let me give you an example. I like to use this one because it's simple. When we think about MedSurg 1 versus MedSurg 2, the actual comprehension of knowledge that our students are going to have in MedSurg 1 is not going to be, at least initially, at the same level as MedSurg 2. So we may start with a little refresher with MedSurg 2. However, we're going to quickly move up that taxonomy to ensure our students are truly aligning their knowledge with application. We know in med-surg 2 is even more important. We want our students to be able to demonstrate the utilization of clinical judgment frameworks in order for our students to truly have that deep comprehension of knowledge and be able to make safe patient care decisions. Okay, so that's what we want to think about when we consider tip number 2, again, Bloom's taxonomy, verbs to align with the actual level of learning. And then we're thinking about our objectives and alignment there, as well as our assignments. All right, so we want to do all 3. And then tip number 3, you all can probably guess what that is. It's going to be learner facilitation, right? So we have to think about the value of learning and specifically, what are we bringing into the classroom when it comes to our students? So this is what we want to consider. Number 1, engaging teaching strategies. All right, so flipped classroom is an example, and use of technology. What is it that you want to remember about use of technology? Well, first and foremost, we don't want it to be a barrier to learning. So how can we prevent it from being a barrier? Step 1, make sure that we're competent in using that technology. Now, I know that's not always easy. Making sure we have the resources, we have the support to achieve competency, so we at least know how to work that technology. And we also know that technology is great as long as it works. And when it doesn't, we cannot be distracted, okay? Because if we are, then we distract our learners from really processing the information that we need for them to have in order to be competent, in order to meet those learning objectives that we have crafted for them. All right, and then the other part when it comes to technology, we want to make sure that we have a plan B, right? Always, because we know even with the best intentions, not only will our technology not work, but our students will tune out, right? That's the worst outcome, is that our students tune out. So let's take a look at page 292 in Billings and Halstead. This is where you're going to see a description of flipped classroom. Okay, so I want you just to stay with me, and we're going to pull out just a few concepts related to flipped classroom, what it is, teaching tips, advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so that's what you want to do as you're thinking about how do I show up and truly demonstrate the concepts that are listed under facilitate learning. Now remember, this is a core competency across all 4 of the CNE exams. Okay, so this is a foundational expectation of behavior that NLN has already laid out for us. This is the core. So when we look at flipped classroom, we see that it is a pedagogical model whereby students conduct significant pre-class preparation. And traditional in-class time is reserved for discussion, for clarity, for closing the loop, we like to say. And that means that students may have an open loop if there's a concept that they don't fully understand, right? They're not able to truly close the loop because they don't have that deep comprehension of knowledge, okay? We want to close as many loops as possible. The model is used in a number of health professions education to address that gap between didactic education and clinical practice performance. It employs asynchronous learning activities such as pre-class video lectures, podcasts, interactive online modules, reading assignments, practice problems, and, of course, the use of technology-based resources. The next concept I want us to look at and really subheading is teaching tips. So specifically, using a variety of synchronous and asynchronous learning is going to help our students better prepare for the flipped classroom model. We want to provide also, now this is an important aspect that isn't talked about a lot. Oftentimes we talk about that pre-class assignment for the flipped classroom model. However, it's equally important to have that post-classroom reflection activity. And that's exactly what page 292 talks about. This is going to help students connect the asynchronous with the synchronous activities for application to practice. Okay, so we can't leave that part out. When we're thinking about assigning a ticket to class as an example, that's what I like to do when I have in-person students. We often hone in on the responsibilities of the student, and rightfully so, because again, we want to maximize that in-classroom time that we have with them so that they can have as much clarity as they need in order to achieve a high level of competency, be able to recognize those cues when they walk in a room, be able to identify what their next step should be, understand what's going on, process that information, and then be able to make those safe patient care decisions. Okay, so remember that again, We want to make sure we're closing the loop with the actual flipped classroom model. That requires us to not only provide a pre-class assignment. I love having pre-video or having videos recorded ahead of time. I do that with all of my students because I want to make sure, even though it's at the graduate level, and I know they're super busy, right? We all know what that feels like when we have been in school trying to work and prioritize our kids, our jobs, and other life experiences that we have. So doing that warm up or welcome or pre-class video is going to help our students connect not only with us, but also have a connection in what their focus needs to be for the upcoming week. Okay, so again, that pre-class video, that warm-up video to help students fully prepare with what we expect them to complete before they come to class and be able to connect with those concepts and us as a human. That's always a plus too. And then the second part is going to be that post-classroom reflective activity. This is how we ensure the loop is closed and help with alignment for application to practice. That's a key concept. So what are some of the disadvantages, right? We know about all of the good parts of flipped classroom. Well, let's take a look. Well, specifically when it comes to flipped classroom, one of the challenges is that faculty who are accustomed to traditional lecture style teaching may struggle. We have to be honest with ourselves about whether or not we're comfortable with that flipped classroom model, right? Because it does take a different level of accountability, communication, and preparation in order to keep the class focused and to make sure the objectives are met. So what else are some of the negatives or disadvantages? It requires time to structure in class and classroom activities and requires ongoing assessment of teaching and learning. So it's the continuous process because we start that learning even before our students cross over into the classroom threshold. And then the last point I want to make is students may not like the extra work required. So we have to think about how are we going to manage that? How are we going to deal with that to ensure that our students are truly, again, not only meeting the objectives, but also that they are learning, right? And it's not a distraction. Again, for context of our conversation today, you're going to focus on flipped classroom, the information in Billings and Halstead to help you close your knowledge gaps, going to the source, right? We don't want you only taking our word for it. We want you going to the source to make sure you have that deep understanding of these key concepts to help you achieve that passing score on the CNE exam. All right, so last few concepts, and then we'll take a look as we close out at that thought-provoking question. Okay, so we said tip number 3. Everybody got that? Learner facilitation. Okay, so it's not only about how we connect with our students, that's important, but we as faculty have to have an understanding about those evidence-based teaching strategies that we're bringing into the classroom to support facilitation. Okay, so competency 1 and competency 2 for CNE are closely aligned. For the other CNE exams, it's not quite in the same numerical order, and yet and still, our ability to facilitate learning and be able to engage our learners on that learning journey that Kolb talks about, they go hand in hand. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at tip number 4. All right, so if you haven't guessed what that one is yet, it is pace yourself. Okay, so there are 150 questions, and you will have 3 hours to take the exam. So make sure you're pacing yourself. You want to make sure also that you're looking at those specific guidelines that are given to you by Measure Learning. Okay, so Measure Learning actually facilitates and coordinates the exams for NLN. All right, and then tip number 5, learning environment. Are we creating an inclusive learning environment? Right? Do we promote civility? How do we engage in discussions with our students to make sure that they understand the expectations, right? So we want to make sure our students are coming to class prepared. They know what we expect, and they know what to expect of us. Okay, so that's a really important part. We talk a lot about what we expect of our students, but we should also talk about what our students can expect of us. So what do I mean by that? Students should expect that we demonstrate caring through coming to class prepared, first of all. Second of all, communicating those expectations. Third of all, following through on our commitments. So if we tell our students that we will grade their assignments by day 4 after they've submitted it, we want to follow through, okay? And if we're not able to do that for whatever reason, we should communicate that. So again, Tip number 5 is all about the learning environment, promoting civility, engaging in respectful discussions, active listening to make sure that we are promoting that healthy, not only student faculty relationship, but that brave space, that safe space where students feel like they can ask us questions. All right, tip number 6 coincides with learning environment, which is embracing learner diversity, realizing that all students learn differently. So what does that mean? Knowing that for some students, they're not going to have the textbooks. Okay, so how do we deal with that? How do we manage that? And for those students that don't ask for help, right? So realizing that even though we would love for all students to ask for help, to raise their hands, to participate, part of the learner diversity piece is that they all learn differently. So that's what we have to think about. How do we still connect with those students who just check out on us even before we can try to establish this civil, this collaborative, this safe space? All right, so think about some strategies you can use. I'll go ahead and share. One of them is going to be the learning styles inventory. So if that's part of our admission process, students are going to complete that, right? All students are. So they have the increased awareness of their preferred learning style, and then we can build on it from there. Okay, so that's step number 1, is as soon as we can get information, get connection with our students in a way that's going to help them long term be better students, be better participants in the classroom. Making sure that we add those at any point and early is always great. But if we can add that as part of our traditional curriculum, that all students are completing this assignment, then the more effective we are going to be at truly engaging that adult learner. All right, tip number 7 is curriculum. Alignment is key, right? We want to think about curriculum alignment. What revisions do we need to make? How do we gather data about those revisions? Well, we know we get data from a lot of different places. All right, so I want you to write that down. Where is the data that we collect to determine what curriculum revisions we need to make? All right, so go ahead and write that down. I'm going to keep talking and then I'll close the loop on a couple of sources. All right, and then we want to think about what are those evidence-based strategies that we are using to make decisions about revising curriculum. We know when we look at the essentials, there's continued conversation about competency-based education and that specific framework and how it can contribute to the nursing student being able to make safer patient care decisions and developing those clinical judgment skills that we know are essential. All right, so if you've had a chance to write down where do we get feedback about curriculum revisions? Well, first and foremost, it's going to be based on our students' performance, right? So that's tip number 7, looking at curriculum, looking at specific strategies we're using to make decisions about whether or not we're going to make curriculum revisions. So student performance, how are they doing on their summative assessments and even their formative assessments that we're asking students to complete throughout the course. Second data collection point is going to be end of course surveys. Third collection point is going to be our healthcare partners. How are we getting feedback from them? Fourth collection point could be our alumni. So once they start in their nursing practice in their specific healthcare organizations, what feedback are we getting from them? That they feel like they were prepared for practice, or did they struggle, right? So we have to think about all of these different data points that we're able to collect to truly inform us about curriculum revisions that need to be in place. All right, we're almost there. Stay with us. So tip number 8, I know we decided to give you all of them at once. Tip number 8 is program development. So thinking about, first and foremost, faculty involvement. How are our faculty involved in changes we're making to our nursing program? Well, we know our accrediting body says that they should be, right? That's in all of the standards for every single accreditation. We want to make sure there's faculty involvement because our faculty, we are the one that are actually facilitating that curriculum, right? So we got to make sure we involve our faculty. And then along with faculty involvement is faculty development, right? That's what you're getting right now. These are some core principles you are going to use as a faculty to help improve your practice, to help you be a more effective nurse educator. Tip number 9. All right, so let's get back to the CNE exam. We want you to narrow, okay? So narrow it down to 2. How to pick the actual write one. Okay, so you want to be able to narrow down to 2 choices on the exam. Remember, you're going to have 3 choices for 150 questions. Each of them are going to have 3 choices. Okay, we want you to at least be able to narrow it down to 2, and then figuring out between the 2, because oftentimes you're going to have 2 good answers but 1 best answer. Okay, so going back to your 2 thoughts, number 1, what is this question really asking me? Okay, for every question you get to. Number 2, what is it that I know for sure about concepts within this question? All right, and then last but not least is going to be your study guide. Some of you already have the study workbook. You got to have a study plan. That's going to help you focus. Okay, so tip number 10 is make sure that you have a plan of study, right? Because we know if we do not map out a plan, then we are planning to fail. Okay, that's what we tell our students. So we got to take our own advice. All right, so let's recap real quick. So tip number 1, who can share? Tip number 1, as I'm pulling them back out. Tip number 1, who can share tip number 1? All right, so if you chose self-assessment, right, knowing where you are, just like whenever we're going somewhere for the first time, we have to use a map, right? You got to know where you're starting from. You got to be able to identify what your next steps are going to be, and the only way you're able to do that is to map out where you're starting from. Okay, and that's a self-assessment. Tip number 2, Bloom's taxonomy. Got to align the verbs, got to align the objectives, and ultimately the assignments using pages 188 through 190 in Billings and Halstead. Oh, need to turn this the right way. Tip number 3, learner facilitation. That's the core, right? Being able to develop those high impact teaching strategies to engage our adult learners, because we don't want to be that sage on the stage. We want to be the guide on the side. We want to be a coach. All right, tip number 4, each exam has 150 questions. Pace yourself, because you'll have 3 hours. Okay, so just like we tell our students in pre-licensure nursing program. And then tip number 5, learning environment. So how do we truly support a brave space, promoting civility, engaging in discussions, right? We want to be active participants in discussions as well. All right, and then tip number 6, learner diversity. Our students all learn differently. They all have competing priorities. What resources do we have available that can help them and be able to build that confidence and be able to establish those consistent resources so they can be successful? Tip number 7 is curriculum. Thinking about what changes are we going to make, where do we get that data from to determine the changes we're going to make, and how do we document those? How do we know they've made a difference? And then we want to be able to use evidence-based strategies, go into the literature, looking at standards that are established by our professional organizations before we make that final decision. All right, so tip number 8 is going to be program development. What changes are we going to make? Well, first, we want to make sure our faculty are involved and that we engage in faculty development, just like what you all are a part of right now. Tip number 9, narrow it down to 2. There are 3 answers on the CNE exam for every question, so at least narrow it down to 2 choices, because oftentimes you're going to see 2 good answers, but only 1 is going to be correct. Finally, you all stayed with me. I'm so happy you did. And that's tip 10. Our workbook has a study plan, but even if you don't have our workbook, you got to have a plan, right? Because we want you to plan to be successful and being able to focus. It's going to take roughly 130 hours or so for you to ensure you're closing your knowledge gaps, okay? When you're moving forward on this journey, having the right resources is key. Billings and Halstead is the primary textbook that we consistently share with our colleagues that you should use. We know that Dr. Caputi's CNE review book is also a good resource. Okay, so that's optional, but the core textbook is going to be Billings and Halstead. All right, so let's take a look at our thought-provoking question, and then we will end our time together. Thank you all for giving us a little bit of extra time. All right, so what's your answer? So if you chose B, give yourself a round of applause. All right, so let's go back to the question just in case you forgot. This is really about the strategy that we should use to engage students in the hands-on experience. It's also called David Kolb's experiential learning theory. His theory says that we don't learn until we've actually had that hands-on concrete experience. So option B really describes that, because Kolb's framework emphasizes concrete experience, reflection, conceptualization, and active experimentation. Simulation with debriefing supports this full learning cycle. His framework says that students have to go through all 4 phases of the learning journey in order for learning to actually happen. And we have to continue to give students feedback right through each phase. So, option A, the rationale as to why it's not correct, is additional lectures increase knowledge acquisition, but they do not provide opportunities for experiential learning. Option C, the rationale why that one is not correct, is reading support knowledge development, but do not provide experiential application. All right, so what we want you to do is continue to reflect, right? So take some time to pause at the end of this snapshot, and we want you to reflect. What attracted you? What about those distractors if you didn't choose the correct answer? What about the distractor attracted you to choose that option? And what act are you going to take? How are you going to execute to avoid misalignment between the evidence-based practice? When you're moving forward on your journey, that's a really important step. 70 to 80% of those questions on the CNE exam at a minimum are at that level of analysis and application. Okay, so acting, executing is a really important part of your journey. And when you're thinking about the next steps that you want to take, that's exactly what we want you to do. We want you to think about, what is it that's going to help me become a stronger educator, and what is going to be my least path of resistance? Because if we were honest, we know when it comes to any certification exam, it seems like the minute we map out a plan, right, and we're laser focused, we even get our textbooks, and then all of a sudden something happens. The only way you won't achieve success on the CNE exam is if you quit. At Dr. Sellars Educate, know that we are here to support you on your journey, and we want you to avoid wasting time and using resources that are not going to help you. Okay, we don't want you wasting time or using resources that are not going to consistently help you. We're looking at the evidence continuously and sharing that information with you about the resources that are consistently helping colleagues across the country, even if they don't choose to partner with Dr. Sellars Educate to help them achieve success. We hope that this snapshot has been helpful. Reach out to us if you have any questions. There is a link right here in the description to our CNE 60 Days program. If you're ready to move forward and commit on your journey, don't do it alone. Everything you need is included in the CNE 60 Days program, including the textbooks, the study workbook, as well as your 7-week study plan. We're so excited to have you all here showing up consistently at Dr. Sellars Educate YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you in our program, or at least in the next snapshot. Have a great one, everybody. Take care.